myself and Anne are going to talk about today are two other myths and associations between things that, pregnant women may take or may avail of in and around delivery and autism. But before we go into that,
I was going to say something.
yes, go
I
on.
actually haven't told you this, but I was said, I'll save it for the pod. I'm now doing that. God help us.
Go on.
So do you know what our childminder said to me about, I think it was last week when I was starting to look into this stuff?
What did she say to us?
She said, you know the way people talk about neurospicy, neurobland kind of, and it's that neurodivergent, neurotypical kind of equivalence, right? She goes, you're not the most neurobland household I've ever worked in. And I was like, really? And she said, yeah. She goes, there are times where I listen to you talk to each other and I'm like, how the hell did they go down that avenue? Because I suppose we don't notice it because it's just our house and our family, But then she started giving me all these random examples and I was like, oh yeah. And I suppose it just illustrated to me that it's a normal, like there's a whole spectrum of normal variation out there of people who are more anxious, people who are a little bit more routine dependent, people who are more kind of toward the ADD side of things.
And people almost sort of stopped there and said, oh, look, taking paracetamol increases your risk of having children with autism. The other thing they did was they looked at the 3 different layers in terms of low dosing, medium dosing, and high dosing. And again, when they looked at it without doing any adjustments, the more paracetamol a mother took during the pregnancy, the higher the risk of their children developing autism. So much so that the risk almost doubled between no use and high dosing.
Can I ask, did any of these studies look at the indication for the paracetamol consumption? Because there's a huge difference there between taking it for fever, taking it for backache, taking it for all of those things.
So this study did.
Okay.
And this is why I love this study. So what I have quoted you so far was not taking any of this into account. Okay? Now, they've also did another further analysis where they looked at so many different other potential confounders, including the indication for taking paracetamol. And let me list them out because I think it's really, really important. So they adjusted for the biological sex of the child. They looked at the birthing parent's diagnosis of migraine, chronic pain, infections, fevers, rheumatoid arthritis, headaches, and any other analgesic use, aspirin, non-aspirin, anti-pain medication, opioids, and also anti-migraine medication. They also looked at parity, the birthing order of that particular child. They looked at the parent's age at delivery, the country of birth, the residential region, cohabitation at delivery, whether the parents were together or not, early pregnancy, body mass index, smoking, whether the birthing parents had autism or not, ADHD or not, history of other psychiatric disorders or not, or conditions, and the birthing parents' prescription use of other medications as well, including antidepressants, anti-seizure medications, and they also then included the sibling control factors. So once they have included all of these issues that also may determine outcome, they found that there is absolutely no relationship between paracetamol intake and the risk of autism. And even the dose-response relationship, meaning that the higher paracetamol you take, the more likely you're going to develop autism, completely disappeared. And they really concluded, which was good, showing that when you actually have a large-scale study that is really rigorous in terms of its methodology, that it's taken into account a lot of other factors, that you actually see that the relationship between the usage of paracetamol and the development of autism is not there.
No.
And that's the message that needs to go out, that it's okay to take.
So they had 1 million mother-baby units who availed of an epidural. And in that 1 million units, the risk of autism spectrum disorder was 1.2%, and the risk of ADHD diagnosis was 4%. And that gave an adjusted hazard ratio of 1.12, so 12% increase, and adjusted hazard ratio of 1.2 for ADHD. So 1.12 for ASD, 1.2 for ADHD. That's before they started cleaning it up. So what it, if you leave it there, it's nearly like the other studies that hadn't actually appropriately started cleaning the data. Okay. So when they actually added in the sibling comparison data, and this is where it's really important. Again, they brought it down to if the mother had an epidural and was diagnosed with, and the baby was diagnosed with subsequently with ASD or ADHD, they then found a sibling where the mother did not have an epidural, so same genetic background, and then looked at ADSD or ADHD diagnosis. And once they added those in, it went down to nothing. So autism spectrum disorder of the adjusted hazard ratio was 0.93, and ADHD diagnosis of the adjusted hazard ratio, once you brought in the sibling data, was 0.99. So that means the closer it is to 1, essentially means that there's no difference. So please, there is no association between having an epidural for labour pain relief and a subsequent diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder or ADHD.
So I like that there was a common theme in the 2 studies that we have done. Pain relief during the pregnancy is okay with paracetamol.
With paracetamol, yeah.
And pain relief during labour is okay with an epidural
for
the risk of autism
spectrum disorder and actually for ADHD with epidurals.
Yeah. And I think it's lovely that we were able to summarize those 2 studies for you, and I hope it clarifies. And if mums that are listening that are considering, their pain relief options, knowing this information.
Especially if they already have a child who carries one of these diagnoses.
Yes.
It's really, really, really important.
Yeah.
And again, it illustrates how it's easy for media to pick up on sensationalist headlines